Hello and welcome to another episode of World History with me, Mr. Bowman. Today we're going to take a look at SOL 4. It is the uh, last section of this SOL, the Classical River Valley Civilizations, featuring China and Persia. Please make sure you have the correct notes out because here we go. So when we look at Persia, or I'm sorry, the geography of China. Again, you got to be aware of these physical barriers. They are going to allow China to create its own unique culture. It isolates it just like what India went through with its geographical barriers. Except there's one problem. In the north, there's flat terrain, relatively flat terrain. You do have some mountains, but if you tried, you can cross them. So what they did is again, when we have these barriers here, the problem is going to lead to the creation of the Great Wall in the north. All right, here's a map that we did in class. This river here is the Indus. That's the Ganges. This is India. You have the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean down here, Bay of Bengal here. This gap right here is going to be the Gobi Desert. It's a very dry, cold desert. It is not sandy like the Sahara. It gets the cold air off this mountain range called the Himalayas. You have this mountain range, which is the Hindu Kush. Then you have this river here, which is the Honghe or Yellow River that flows into the Yellow Sea. Go figure. Yellow River, Yellow Sea. This peninsula here is Korea. These bottom four islands form the country of Japan. And now here's the Pacific Ocean. This is where the Great Wall is going to be. This gap through here. So, second section deals with the dynasties of China. There's four of them, and I want to go ahead and apologize for pronouncing these incorrectly. I know Mr. Shi at the middle school would definitely disapprove my pronunciation, but we have the Shang, the Zhao, the Qin, and the Han. What I have learned is that to us it looks like a Qin, and we would think it's pronounced Ken. It's actually pronounced Chen. This is the first empire. The leader who becomes the first emperor, unites China for the first time, and this is why when we look at the name of the country, China, it is Chin, based on that family name. The reason why I have a picture of a roller coaster, yes, I do love roller coasters. However, that has nothing to do with this. My passion for roller coasters has nothing to do with China. However, what is the connection is the fact that as one dynasty starts to fall, another one rises up in its place. And so it definitely goes hand in hand. So here we go. So here is the Shang. When we look at the Shang, again, it's the first dynasty on the Honghe or Yellow River. And like all firsts that we've talked about so far this year, it's going to start with your basics, such as farming. Then they're going to kind of advance themselves in the realm of religion or spirituality in the aspect of oracle bones. This is what the Shang would use to communicate with their gods or ancestors. They did believe in ancestry worship. So it's a different way of thinking and believing. We do start to see a type of writing developed on oracle bones, and you'll see the image on your notes, and you'll see my image here in a few minutes. That's very basic, and eventually it will advance to what we call calligraphy today. The Shang also developed bronze, and not just for tools and weapons, but also pottery and other useful items around civilization. Probably one of the biggest developments during the Shang is the fabric we call today silk. It becomes a luxury item, and for that time, The Shang was the only one to create it, and so you have a lot of people that that would want this material and be willing to pay for it no matter the cost. And the Shang knew this, and so they, of course, they um, raise the price up as they see fit. Here is the example of oracle bones I was telling you about. If you take a look at these images here, what the oracle bones would be, this in this case is a turtle, bottom of a turtle shell, and you have the different writing symbols, the older calligraphy on here, asking questions. I compared it in class to like a magic 8 ball, asking a magic 8 ball of a certain yes or no style question, shake it, and it'll appear whether or not I can do it or not, or ask again later type of thing. In this case, they would write questions, put the turtle shell or bone into the fire. It will crack. The oracle will then read those cracks and to determine whether or not the gods or ancestors approve or disapprove the situation. Eventually, the calligraphy is going to go from that to this very intricate, detailed writing system. Here are some examples of bronze work that the Chinese created. These are samples that I took pictures of when I was at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts downtown Richmond. It's probably about 45 minutes or an hour away from Amelia. It's got some great stuff, not just Chinese. It has a ton of Egyptian stuff, some really cool stuff from Greece and Rome. I definitely highly recommend it if you have a weekend. The Zhao dynasty comes afterwards, and yes, they do overthrow the Shang. However, they keep a lot of the same ideas and beliefs of the Shang. And one of the things that they do create on their own is something called the Mandate of Heaven. This concept and the next concept are two of the major things that students have a hard time with in this unit. So please make sure you pay attention and figure out how you can remember this. So the mandate of heaven is basically when the gods or deities, ancestors approve of what is happening. They want something to happen, and so it is happening. That's the mindset, the concept, the belief system, in the sense of if the gods or ancestors want me to win the lottery, I win the lottery. If they didn't want me to win the lottery, I won't win the lottery. That type of thing. And in this case, with the Zhao, people were questioning, why were you taking over from the Shang? Why did you overthrow them? And so their response was the gods wanted me to. Now, later on, they invent and create what's called the dynastic cycle. In this dynastic cycle, it basically was their reasoning as to why dynasties come and go. It does deal with the mandate of heaven. The way I describe it in class was if dynastic cycle is a motor or engine, I'll say it one more time. If the dynastic cycle is a motor or engine, then the mandate of heaven is the fuel. It's what makes it spin. It's what makes it work. Here's an example of what I was talking about. You have a circle in your notes. If you want, I would highly recommend the bold writing on the outside. Please transfer that into your notes somewhere. Again, you gain the mandate of heaven, you gain the God's approval, you have it, then things start falling apart. That is you're losing their approval. You're losing it. At rock bottom, these are things, you look at these examples: floods, invasions, revolts, riots. These are events that the ruler can't really control on their own. They can't control the rain. Now, could they control the levees and the dams and things of that nature? Possibly. But again, it's looking at this idea that they're losing the approval from the gods. Now, during the Zhao dynasty, they improved their tools and weapons by starting to use iron. Keep in mind this process, you have a very what's the best way to put it? A better or quality. It's a better quality weapon and tool than a bronze tool or weapon. So this is a huge plus for China. However, during the Zhou dynasty, you have an issue within China. You have the states, the different parts of the Zhou dynasty are fighting each other, and this becomes known as the period of warring states, also known as a Chinese Civil War. So during this time, a lot of people were fighting over land, whether or not the difference, the barriers, the boundaries, the resources, whatever the case was, they were fighting, and so the ruler needed assistance, needed help bringing things back under control. And during this time period is when we believe the three major Chinese philosophies of Confucianism, Taoism or Taoism, it can be spelled either way, and legalism come to light. And the goal of these three philosophies is to bring social order. And they all do it differently, which we'll take a look at in a few minutes. However, the Zhou dynasty wouldn't last much longer after the period of warring states, and the Qin or Qin dynasty comes to power. Now, under the Qin dynasty, the ruler Qin Shi Hung Dai or Hung Di begins using what is called legalism. And legalism is when you have a very harsh, strict government with extreme punishment for those that break the law. And he truly does get China back together. He becomes known as the first emperor. But the social order is very costly financially because what happens is each state had different measurements. What I mean by that is how across the United States we use the standard measurements of pounds, feet, inches, miles. Other places they use what's called metric, centimeters, meters, kilometers, those type of things. Very different in size. So the problem is when we have a country that uses different measurements, then there's going to be issues on trade. There's going to be issues financially because each one of those states also had different currency. So when you go and trade currency, the exchange rate is going to be off, and people are going to feel like they've been slighted or they've been cheated. So once he's gotten Once he got China under control, he decides to build a Great Wall and help protect China. So he orders it to be built, and it is built by force. The peasants were forced to build the wall. If you were not financially helping the wall being built, you were physically helping. And it did not matter age, it did not matter gender, it did not matter if you're sick or healthy, you were helping with the wall. And again, the purpose of this wall is to protect from invasions. As I said in class earlier last week, any type of wall that was built in world history, about 99.5% of the time is built to protect and to keep people out. Very rarely is it ever to keep people in. So here are some images of the Great Wall. That's my favorite one there. I like how the fog, the clouds are going over it. And you can see, I like this one because you can see how steep the mountains are, the hills are, in which the wall is built upon. I like this one too because it kind of looks like it's like a sleeping dragon. If you think and can imagine the mountain being a dragon there. Not only did he have the wall built, but he also built a tomb for himself. He was under the impression that in the afterlife, that these soldiers, called terracotta soldiers, would come to life and protect him and his soul in the afterlife. Each one of these soldiers are handmade, and they are each different types of armor and different facial features, different hairstyles. Different positions in the military. Some were infantry, some were cavalry, some dealt with archery. And soon after the passing of Qin Shi Huang Dai, the empire falls as well. This is a very similar situation as to um, what occurred with Ahsoka in the Mauryan dynasty. Very harsh, strict ruler, but very quickly after his death, the dynasty falls apart. So again, here's some images of the terracotta soldiers. Again, these are all life size. The statues stand anywhere between 5, 6 feet tall, and the horses are pretty standard in height as well. So then, after the Qin dynasty, you have the Han. The Han learns from the Qin's mistakes. They want the people to like them, and in doing so, they go and build what is known as the civil service system. This is a system in which the government offers people jobs, and in order for you to take a job or to receive a job, you have to take a test. Eventually, the Han Dynasty does fall into civil war and breaks into small pieces, small independent kingdoms over time. But then the Han do come back and they maintain control of China for about 500 more years. So let's look at this civil service system that the Han created. Again, they want everybody to like them. So they offer this test to anyone. Anybody can come up and take it. This is something that they feel as if it's kind of what we call a PR, public relations type of move. All right, you want to play nice in the sandbox, give everybody a chance. However, they're not stupid. What's going to happen is if you want a good job, you have to score better. You have to score higher. And so, in doing so, this test isn't simple. It's a test about history, philosophy, laws, arts, and these aren't things that just anybody can know about. You have to have an education, and that's the thing. Even though the tests are open to anyone, you have to have an education. And at that time, we're talking about the rich, educated males. So again, they wanted people in those positions to understand and be able to rule properly, but at the same time keep some type of social order. So what we're going to have here is you have a map of the different dynasties. The first dynasty, the Shang, is this hand-drawn dash line here. The dotted line, all right, that's right around here, is the Zhao. The solid line, as you can see how much more they controlled, that's the Qin or Qin dynasty. And then eventually you have the Han dynasty, which is the dash line. As you can see, it actually conquers North Korea and it stretches all the way across. Now, what is this mountain range here? Anybody remember? If you said the Himalayas, you are correct. So as you can see how the border kind of goes around the Himalayas, no one's going to climb there. They don't have the ability or technology to do that yet due to its 10,000 above 10,000 feet. All right, that concludes part 2, and now we are off to the land of philosophies. Keep in mind, a philosophy is something that you believe in, something in which you practice. However, it is not a religion. You do not worship a philosophy. So here are the 3 Chinese philosophies, starting with Confucianism. Confucianism was created by a guy named Confucius, who was a teacher and a scholar. He was an educator. So that should tell you something. He believes that education is going to help. And he talks about this in his book called The Analects. And he says that through respect and education, that order will survive. That order will rise up. That order will be brought back to China. And he also talks about the 5 relationships that all of us at some point in time are in one of 5 relationships. And those 5 relationships are friend to friend. You have brother and sister, siblings. You have parent to child. You have spouse, and then you have ruler to subject. So those are your core relationships that he feels that we all should have equal respect. And if we do have that equal respect going back and forth, then we will have social order. It is when that respect is not received or not given equally is when order goes away. Now, eventually, the Chinese government does approve Confucianism and will build schools and have teachers that teach the intellects and the ideas of Confucius. However, you will also have some governments rise in China that are going to disapprove it, ban it, burn schools down, burn the copies of the intellects, kill off the teachers that are teaching Confucianism, and almost exist as if it never happened. Core ideas about Confucianism are that humans are naturally good, not bad. That you have what's called respect for elders, known as filial piety. There is a code of politeness. My mindset is how I was raised was called manners. And again, that's still a predominant characteristic of Confucianism in China. And a strong emphasis on education. So when we look at Confucianism, your mind should automatically think respect and education right away. And Confucius also felt as if our ancestors guide us, that if we don't honor and respect our ancestors, known as, again, filial piety, that they can make our life very difficult. Another line of thought that came around during the Zhao dynasty is called Taoism. Now, keep in mind, this can also be spelled with a T, so you might see it as Taoism. Lao Tzu created this concept, and when we talk about this idea of humility, this idea of having a simple life, of this inner peace, accepting who we are for who we are, that we aren't striving to be something different, that we have to accept and be at peace with what we have. And again, this idea of harmony with nature, he writes about this idea called the Tao, this universal force that connects all of us. He discusses in his writings. The one idea that comes out and I always remember about Lao Tzu and Taoism is that he writes about how when you're in the woods hiking or just walking through the woods or looking at the forest when you're out hunting or whatever you're doing, he said, notice that you should be like the trees in the fact of how these trees are not fighting to be the biggest, baddest tree in the forest, that there are different trees. There are small trees, there's tall trees, there's short trees, there's round trees, there's fat trees, there's skinny trees, there's trees with leaves, there's trees with needles. There's all kinds of different leaves out there, all kinds of different trees out there. And it's just a peaceful acceptance. And so note that there's nothing on here about education. He feels that education is what causes this social chaos. And that you have to have rich to have poor. You have to have intelligence to have not so smart people. All right. And this idea of harmony, this idea you have to have one to have the other, is something that he strongly feels would bring social order back to China during the Zhao dynasty. Now, these two, Taoism and Confucianism, have a very similar idea in this symbol known as the yin and yang. You can find it in both philosophies. However, with Confucianism, it focuses on this balance of respect, whereas Taoism is more so a balance of opposites. For instance, male, female, light and dark, day and night. You have to have one to have the other. On to the third and final philosophy known as legalism. Legalism, as I mentioned earlier, is a type of belief in which a strong, strict government brings social order. And along with that comes harsh punishment. Now, when Qin Shi Huangdi uses this, he also goes in and starts controlling the ideas and actions of the people. Today we call that censorship. And it's something that is going to bring the Zhao to its knees. It's going to crumble the Zhao dynasty. And I like to use this idea of a puppet master during this time. Your major contributions of China are the civil service system, porcelain, which is a type of pottery, paper, which is the type of paper that we are using today. This will eventually lead to the use of paper money. The idea of silk, which we talked about with the Shang dynasty, but more importantly, the Silk Road. The Silk Road is a major trade route that stretches from all the way from China to the Mediterranean. It goes from the east to the west. Now, some of these goods are your physical goods that will go all the way across China, or I'm sorry, not China, but all across China, yes, but also across Asia to the Mediterranean. But you also have not just the physical goods, but also ideas. And we see this with Buddhism. When it goes to China, we have two different branches that form the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. Part five, the final part of SOL 4 for this year, is taking a look at the Empire of Persia. When we talk about Persia, we are talking about the area starting in the um, roughly in the Middle East, and it's going to go towards the west and take on Mesopotamia, and it will become one of the largest empires of the known world. It's going to capture areas of Babylon, Assyria, Palestine, Egypt, and eventually goes north to Anatolia. Again, these areas are in the Middle East. You see Egypt there in Africa. Anatolia is going to be in what we would call today modern day Turkey, or you can also call it Asia Minor. Now, they do try and conquer Greece. However, they are never able to conquer Greece. And many tried, many different emperors tried, but they all failed. Now, today we call the area that was Persia the modern country of Iran. Now, some people call it Iran, some people call it Iran, and either way, that's where Persia was. Now, why do I have a picture of a cat? Well, I have a picture of a cat because that cat is a Persian cat. And the phrase I came up with years ago is that Persian cats aren't greasy. Yes, it's weird, and no, do not eat cats. However, Persian cats aren't greasy is a phrase that will help you to remember that the Persian Empire was never included Greece. That Greece was never a part of the Persian Empire. So when we look at our map, again, you have the Nile with Egypt, you have the Euphrates and Tigris, you have Mesopotamia, you have Persia is here, and it's going to eventually conquer all of this. Here's Anatolia. This is Greece. So this area with the Persians are never included in the Persian Empire. So what was it like to be a part of the Persian Empire? First of all, if you were conquered by them, they allowed you to keep your own culture. Other empires during this time period forced their captors to lose their own culture. They were forced to pray the way of the rulers and things of that nature. So they could not keep their own way of life. They also formed what's called the imperial bureaucracy. The word imperial means empire. And bureaucracy is kind of the reason why I have the image of the poker, or not poker dealer, but the card dealer down at the bottom dealing out the cards. Because what happened, the emperor cannot be at all these places because the empire is so large. So what he does is he puts certain people in charge of these sections. Today we would call them a governor. Back then they're called satraps. And they were the eyes and ears. So they would report and respond to the empire, or the emperor, excuse me. One of the major trade routes was known as the Royal Road. It would stretch from Anatolia to the heart of Persia and stretched about almost 1,700 miles long. They also developed a religion known as Zoroastrianism, created by Zoroaster. Its core idea was that there was two major forces that oppose each other in controlling the universe. There are also some interesting things that this religion had similar ideas of others, particularly Judaism, and then later on Christianity and Islam, things like heaven and hell and the final day of judgment. So there's your empire. Again, notice the fact that you have Greece in a different color because, again, Persian cats aren't greasy. Greece was not a part of the Persian Empire. Now, this red line is the Royal Road. So as you can see, even though this one line here, it connected a lot of different places. There were side roads that would connect down to Egypt and throughout Persia. It will also become part of the Great Silk Road trade routes as well. So what all is left of Persia? Again, the size of it. It was just massive. Going from the Hindu Kush Mountains to the west to Egypt in the southwest to Anatolia. You also start to notice that when we talk about Greece in our next unit, we will have a section about the Persian War, and we'll get into more detail about what happened and why the Persians were not successful in conquering Greece. But again, the Persian Wars stopped Persia from expanding. Eventually, this guy, Alexander the Great, comes to power in Macedonia. His father, Philip II, goes and conquers Greece. And so Alexander does inherit Greece. He does inherit the Macedonian Empire and then expands it to conquer all of what the Persians controlled. He's going to become obsessed with Greek culture, with Persian culture, and he starts blending these cultures in what we call today a Hellenistic society. But ladies and gentlemen, that will conclude our video. I appreciate you being here and paying attention. And until next time.